Winston S. Churchill, The World Crisis, Volume 5, Chapter 9, The Assembly of the Eastern Armies. The Austrian plan for a war against Russia contemplated the assembly of their forces in the Galician plain behind the San and Dniester rivers, and in front of the Carpathians. This was well suited for an immediate advance into Russian territory, but threatened many dangers in the event of defeat. The Austrian line of retreat lay either south and southwest through the passes of the eastern Carpathians, or westward through Przemysl or Krakow into Bohemia, or possibly into German Silesia through the narrow corridor between Russian Poland and the western Carpathians, called the Moravian Gate. Since in making his war plans against Russia, Conrad had resolved upon a forestalling attack, his mishandling of the opening movements becomes all the more blameworthy. Plan R had counted upon 4 Austrian armies to support his offensive, in which case his superiority to the Russians between the 20th and the 30th days would have been substantial. But Plan B had tripped up Plan R, and only 3 armies and, at the best, a bare equality were available to sustain a most ambitious scheme of war. It was perhaps with some compunction that Moltke acquainted Conrad on August 2 with his general dispositions. He certainly endeavored to state in the most favorable terms the German contributions to the Eastern Front. General von Prittwitz, the commander-in-chief of the 8th German Army in East Prussia, was ordered to contain as strong forces of the Russians as possible, so as to keep them away from the Austrian army and lighten its task in the first fighting. Should the Russians undertake a premature offensive against East Prussia, with forces greatly superior to the German army of the East, an Austro-Hungarian victory will thereby be facilitated, and the more so the earlier the Austro-Hungarian army enters upon its advance towards Russia. Should no such premature and greatly superior Russian offensive against Germany north of the Vistula take place, the army of the East will advance in the direction which brings greatest relief to the Austrian-Hungarian armies. In addition, a German Landwehr corps formed from the fortress garrisons was assembling opposite Częstochow under General von Woyrsch. This corps would invade Russia on the 12th day of mobilization, August 13, marching in the direction of Radom, and keep in mind tactical cooperation with the Austrian left. The Austrian army, concluded Moltke, can consequently count with certainty upon a tactical support of its offensive against Russia by the whole of the German forces assembling in the east. The earlier and more continuous the advance towards Russia, the greater will be the combined success. Conrad, on the other hand, continued to count on and urge the fulfillment of what he believed Moltke had promised in the pre-war conversations, namely that the Germans, simultaneously with his drive to the north, would make a downward stroke in strong force from East Prussia, southward and southeastward, towards this same area between Warsaw and Brest-Litovsk, which he was attacking from the opposite quarter. Again and again he repeats in his telegrams and letters to Moltke and Prittwitz the name of Südlitz. He announced to Moltke on August 3 his intention to take the offensive with his left-wing armies eastward and northward on August 20. But he added, "It is in any event desired that the offensive of the 4½ Corps under General von Prittwitz should take place in the direction of Südlitz." Conrad also was forming from his garrisons in the neighborhood of Krakow under General Kummer an improvised force called an army group. It consisted of a cavalry division, cyclists, and 44 infantry battalions with artillery. These would press on without halting into Russia, shoulder to shoulder with the German corps. This operation of Woyrsch and Kummer was of course intended to be no more than a raid into Russian territory in an area where it was believed to be almost entirely undefended. It would create a diversion while the regular forces were assembling. It could not seriously influence events. About Conrad's requests for the southward advance of the 4.5 German corps from East Prussia to Südlitz, Moltke maintained a complete silence. His orders to Prittwitz, commanding the 8th German Army, the sole defense of the eastern frontiers of Germany, were that he should not advance into Russia unless the Russians stood on the defensive. But this was not imparted to his ally. On other matters, the German chief of the staff was voluble, and his letters may serve us as a chronicle of events which only indirectly concern this account. Moltke to Conrad, August 5, 1914. The assurance of Your Excellency that Austria-Hungary will carry through in sure fidelity to her alliance the struggle which has been begun confirms me on a point on which I never had any doubt. I did not need it, my dear comrade, and I would rather doubt my God than the fidelity which we have established between us. The struggle will be a severe one for us, since England, too, has ranged herself on the side of the murderers and of the Russian knout. We hope, with God's help, to carry it through even so. Our advance in Belgium certainly is brutal, but for us it is a matter of life and death, and whoever stands in our way must take the consequences. We must tackle France in the open field. We cannot involve ourselves in a prolonged war of position before her barricaded eastern frontier, for the decision must be obtained as quickly as possible. To that end we require Liège and the direct route through Belgium. I am sorry that blood should flow, but Belgium has rudely rebuffed all our most far-reaching assurances. The news from Russia sounds favorable. On our front in the east they have retired in confusion behind the Narew. They are, it seems, evacuating the whole of Russian Poland. This war, which sets almost the whole of Europe alight, will probably cost us our fleet, but the decision will be reached on land. The spirit of our people is excellent. Every man knows that the existence of Germany is at stake, and all are ready to give their utmost for the fatherland. The troops can hardly find accommodation for the mass of volunteers. The entire country, men, women, and children, is ready to act. There is an angry bitterness against faithless Russia. Our mobilization is developing like clockwork. Not a single hitch has so far occurred. Once the assembly has been successfully completed, the struggle which will decide the course of world history for the next 100 years can begin. It is an inward joy to me to be able to take part with you in this struggle. With God, my comrade. The chief of the German staff added 3 postscripts. First, that Italy's felony would be revenged in history. Secondly, that Romania would probably be friendly to the Central Empires. And thirdly, that Turkey, very likely, would declare war against Russia within the next few days. He concluded in a strong vein. Assemble your whole force against Russia. Even Italy cannot be such a dirty dog as to fall upon your rear. Let the Bulgarians loose against Serbia and leave the pack of them to tear each other to pieces. There must now only be one objective, Russia. Thrust the knout carriers into the marshes of the Pripyat and drown them there. It was easier said than done. Indeed, Moltke's next letter, written on the 9th, offered little but verbal encouragement to the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, now plunged out of its depth in the deluge. Moltke to Conrad, August 9, 1914. Any action by Italy against Austria at this difficult time, against her allies hitherto, after having taken upon herself to break faith, appears to me so horrifying that so far I cannot believe in it. If this felony, which will be the culminating point of rascality, really takes place, then, in my view, there is nothing for it except for Austria forthwith to close the jaw of the hungry beast of prey. That is, to cede territory as a bribe for peace. The point is to wage war successfully against Russia and to defer everything else for a later arrangement. Then follows a bleak notification. Dear friend, we ourselves here are in so difficult a situation, with 4 enemies against us, that we cannot spare anyone, willingly though we would do so. We have already gone to our utmost limit, and we have already fallen back on our Landsturm. We must have a decision in the West. That is a question of life for us. You know yourself how willingly I would help. It cannot be done. The end of this letter, rather an excited screed of the directing mind of the Schlieffen Plan, is narrative. We have today taken the first Russian battery from a cavalry brigade. The Russians attack most stupidly and are shot down everywhere. Everywhere are small scattered attacks by cavalry brigades and small detachments of infantry. We already have over 500 prisoners, who are glad to get something to eat. The Belgians are quite negligible, incapable of attack. They had 5 brigades in Liège, which was strongly entrenched, and our 6 peace brigades stormed it with nothing but the resources of the field army, 4,000 to 5,000 prisoners. The forts on the northern front alone have not yet surrendered, but from tomorrow onwards they will be under fire from the rear. The crossings of the Maas are in our hands intact. Our cavalry is pushing on towards Brussels and Antwerp. The fight has cost us some blood, not overmuch, and it has paid us. We are now waiting for the English. With God, dear friend, 1,000 thanks for the heavy artillery. May I be able to reciprocate? Konrad now addressed himself to Prittwitz direct. Konrad to Prittwitz. Telegram, August 14. Offensive of our left wing towards Lublin and Cholm will start on August 22. The general situation indicates that an offensive by German Eastern Army in direction of Südlitz is a decisive importance, and it is urgent that Südlitz be reached as quickly as possible. I request information by return as to intention of Headquarters German Army of the East. Captain Fleischmann, Austrian liaison with Prittwitz, to Konrad. Telegram, August 15, 10 a.m. At the moment enemy is entering East Prussia from Kovno, Olita, and south thereof. A blow is about to be struck against this move, which should succeed in the next few days. Only after that can operations be begun in direction of Südlitz. German Eastern Army is already drawing important forces upon itself and believes that it is thereby freeing the way for the Austrian offensive. This news was anathema to Konrad. He regarded the German advance towards Kovno as an eccentric, that is divergent, operation, useless for his purposes and wrong in itself. Konrad to Prittwitz, August 15, 1914. Only by cooperation can success against Russia be achieved. On August 14 I communicated through Captain Fleischmann. I renewed the request for the offensive in the direction of Südlitz. An exchange of views is desired to explain to Your Excellency why I ascribed to the advance of the German Army of the East against Südlitz a decisive importance for the general success. And after a lengthy exposition, it thus appears to me that the task of warding off a Russian advance against Berlin and thus protecting the rear of the main German forces fighting against France, while at the same time cooperating with the Austro-Hungarian armies in the defeat of the common enemy, can only be carried out reliably by handing over the defense of East Prussia against Russian invasion to reserve divisions and Landwehr, supported by the fortresses, while at the same time the main forces of the army under Your Excellency's command begin the offensive in the general direction of Südletz. I gather from Captain Fleischmann's report of August 14 that Your Excellency, contrary to the above view, is now striking against the invader towards Kowno-Olita, and will not begin the operations against Südletz until after that stroke. In a romantic mood, he suggested at least the advance of 2 or 3 divisions 100 miles into the hostile territory, crowded with Russian troops of unknown strength. The Germans in East Prussia, who were expecting to be attacked from 2 directions by nearly 2.5 times their numbers, had neither will nor means for such adventures. According to his Spartan code, Conrad made his headquarters at Przemysl in a barrack room with straw as his bed and an oil lamp for light. He had need to mortify the flesh. His second army could only arrive in the decisive theatre 10 days late, and after the main shock of battle upon which Conrad counted so much had already clashed. The German help from the north was plainly not forthcoming. Thus 2 all-important factors in his combination had already disappeared. Should he, in these circumstances, persist in his offensive? Still resolute for the offensive, he nevertheless left Vienna without deciding finally upon its direction. His left-wing army would not be ready to move before the 21st. Perhaps the Germans would have beaten the Russians in the north by then and would be able to send him aid or at least make a helpful diversion. At any rate, Conrad decided to keep his option open for a while. On August 18 he told General Auffenberg, who commanded the Fourth Army, to be prepared to strike either north, northeast or east. Before leaving Vienna, he had dispatched the greater part of the Austro-Hungarian cavalry north, northeast and east to reconnoitre the whole of the frontier from the Dniester to the Vistula on the general line Mohilev, Lutsk, Lublin. This ambitious program was far beyond the capacity of his 10 cavalry divisions. The width of the frontier to be searched was 250 miles. The distance from London to the Scottish border, and its depth was over 90 miles. The time available was only 4 days. It had been expected that the Russians, according to their custom, would herald their advance by clouds of Cossack cavalry. Ivanov, however, had no cavalry screen. He preferred to use his cavalry to bridge the gaps between his 4 armies as they closed in westward from their 300-mile front. In consequence, the Austrian horsemen found little or nothing before them until here and there they came up against covering parties of Russian infantry, whose fire, drawn by the bright reds and blues of their peacetime uniforms, caused heavy local losses and speedy retirements. The results of the Austrian cavalry reconnaissance were worthless. The Austrian saddle, owing to its excessive padding, proved unserviceable for such long marches in August weather. So many of the horses had sore backs that a number of regiments returned on foot, leading their steeds. Entire divisions could not move for a week. The Austrian aeroplanes, nominally 42, most of which were soon unserviceable, although matched by equally infantile Russian aviation, procured no news of any value. The order for general mobilization signed by the Tsar at midday on July 30, 1914, involved in European Russia and the Caucasus 30 corps with a total of 96 infantry and 37 cavalry divisions, about 2,700,000 men, in addition to 900,000 special reserves and fortress troops. The arrival of the various Asiatic army corps from the 30th day onward would raise the total to 1,830 battalions, 1,250 squadrons, and 6,720 cannons, in all roughly 5 million men, of which about 2/3 were combatants. If Austria and Germany had to fight on two fronts, Russia had to fight two enemies on one wide front. The Russians had alternative mobilization plans for war with the Central Empires. Germania envisaged the bulk of the German forces massed against Russia. Austria contemplated Germany on the defensive in the east. In both cases, the field armies were to be divided into the Northwest Group, consisting of the 1st and 2nd Armies, and the Southwest Group, consisting of the 3rd, 5th, and 8th Armies. The 4th Army was to be added to the Northwest in the event of G, or to the Southwest in the event of A. The 6th and 7th Armies protected the flanks and the line of battle stretched from the Baltic and Finland to Romania and the Black Sea. In either alternative, all Russian Poland west of the Vistula was to be evacuated on the outbreak of hostilities in order to ensure an unhurried concentration. The Northwest Group of armies was to assemble along the East Prussian frontier and the Southwest along the Galician frontier of Austria. These primary arrangements were common to both plans. If Germany took the offensive in main force at the outset in the east, both groups of Russian armies were to retire alike towards a line running north and south through Brest-Litovsk and behind the Pripyat marshes, abandoning the whole of Poland, Warsaw and all the fortresses of the Vistula and the Narew. If necessary, the strategy of the Moscow campaign of 1812 would be repeated. The Russian line would retire still farther to gain time at all costs for the arrival in 3 or 4 weeks or more of the Asiatic troops, 5½ Siberian and 2 Turkestan corps, and the complete assembly of the whole resources of the empire before attempting a decisive counterstroke. So much for Germania. If, on the other hand, Germany remained on the defensive in the east, both groups of Russian armies were to attack at once, the Northwest Group invading East Prussia and the Southwest Galicia, to conquer these two bastions preparatory to reassembling east of Warsaw for a combined advance into the center of Germany. The Grand Duke Nicholas, uncle of the Tsar, had assumed command of all the Russian armies against Germany and Austria upon the declaration of war. By August 6, the Russian General Headquarters, in future called the Stavka, learned definitely that the German main forces, including those along its eastern frontier from Pomerania, Posen, and eastern Silesia, were entraining for the French front. Germania was not going to happen, and Plan A, as had been generally expected, would come into force. The 4th Army therefore joined the 3 armies in the Southwest Group facing Galicia. All these preliminary movements had been minutely concerted and came into operation in response to the simplest gestures. But now France, with nearly the whole might of Germany pouring down upon her, began to raise strident cries for help. In the arrangements concerted from 1911 onwards between France and Russia, a violent irruption into Germany with the object of relieving France from German pressure was to be made by Russia from the outset, if Germany threw her main weight to the west. Now that this was clearly happening, the French government, going much further than the pre-war protocols, urged Russia to march directly against Germany. This would have involved great changes in the carefully preconceived plans. Moreover, the Grand Duke Nicholas, although by no means overrating the Austrian armies, was not prepared to march past them into Germany, leaving them behind his left shoulder, without quelling them, at least for the time being. To show Russian goodwill and sincerity towards her imperiled ally, he ordered between August 7 and 10 the formation of 2 more armies, the 9th and 10th, at Ivangorod and behind Warsaw, with the German frontier of Thorn, Posen and Breslau as their eventual objective. Moreover, in order to accelerate the formation and advance of these armies, the Stavka decided to skip some important preparatory stages and had devised a form of forward mobilization which, at a serious cost in efficiency, gained 8 or 9 precious days. It was expected in all the war offices that the main struggle in the West would be in full progress from August 19 onwards, and history will recognize the intense loyal efforts made by the Tsar and his generals to make their onfall with the greatest possible strength at the same time.